Jeff spent Saturday morning in meditation while Perrin kept busy cleaning the apartment. When she was a teenager, Perrin's mother would assign her several Saturday chores to keep her from working herself into a dither over a date that evening. It seemed a lifetime ago, Woodland Hills in the 70s. She remembered her father teasing her about her dithers. He'd say, "A dither is a state of vacillation or frustrated excitement or fear. You're dithered, dear." "It's appropriate for today," she said out loud as she scoured the bathroom wash basin. "What's appropriate?" Jeff asked from the doorway. "Dither. I'm in a dither. Want to make something out of it, buddy?" She laughed. Jeff shook his head. "It's almost time to go." The Saturday morning traffic was bumper to bumper on Wilshire, becoming gridlocked as they neared the 405 overpass. "All these people couldn't be going to the Federal Building, could they?" Perrin asked. Wilshire was roadblocked at the overpass, and policemen were diverting inbound traffic onto the southbound 405. "Maybe they'll let us through if I explain I'm the star attraction," Jeff said, glancing at Perrin. She huddled in the passenger seat, her hand clutching her throat. "Maybe you could just hand them a flyer as you run the barricade," she replied. Jeff followed the traffic up the ramp and onto the freeway, exiting at the first off-ramp, then winding through the back streets to within 2 blocks of the Federal Building. They parked on a neighborhood street of 1940s bungalows with fully grown palm trees standing sentry in perfect curbside rows. "These used to be working-class homes," Jeff said as he got out of the car. "But today they cost $250,000 or more, and I don't know how any working-class stiff can afford one." During the night, the rain had stopped, and the day was gray, blustery, and threatening. Perrin was wearing her dangling crystal earrings and was dressed in a blue Ford Probe racing jacket, faded 501 jeans, and boots. Jeff was wearing a wool herringbone sport coat, a black shirt, black jeans, and Nike running shoes. Jeff handed Perrin the Beretta car keys. The box of flyers were tucked under his left arm, Perrin clutching his right. Arm in arm, they walked down the sidewalk, past a young boy on his bicycle, past an old woman unloading sacks of groceries from the trunk of her car, past a pot-bellied man cutting grass with a sputtering power mower. It was 11:45 a.m. when Jeff and Perrin reached the Federal Building, in the middle of a square block of well-kept lawn. Located at the edge of Westwood, the building is often the site of activist demonstrations. Although not yet noon, thousands of people spilled over into the blockaded city streets. Policemen were everywhere. "Oh, Jeff, please, let's rethink this," Perrin said as they began to squeeze their way through the excited crowd. Jeff thrust a stack of flyers into her hand. "Give them out," he yelled over the din. Someone whipped a large Greenpeace flag back and forth over the heads of the crowd. The ground was littered with Earth First flyers. As they made their way slowly toward the center of the lawn, they passed people carrying posters, some hand-printed, others professionally done. U.S. Get out of El Salvador. Maintain women's rights. Boycott grapes. Ban animal laboratory testing. There were men on the roof of the 17-story building. Probably a SWAT team, Jeff thought. A crane lifted a television cameraman high above the throng. Overhead, a helicopter maintained its position above the building, twirling lazily in the sky like some huge insect, its noise irritating those on the ground, the downdraft throwing up swirling debris. Shielding his eyes, Jeff searched for the ideal position and decided it would be in the crane bucket with the cameraman. It was 12:01 p.m. by the time they maneuvered beneath the crane. Jeff stopped, closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and drew the glowing, pulsating crystal rod from his right-hand pocket. Pointing it at the crowd in front of him, he began to release the energy, pushing them back. At first, they didn't realize what was happening. Then some began screaming in fear, others in excitement. Jeff, Perrin at his side, began to turn slowly, pushing the people back. They completed the turn and intensified the energy, turning again and again until a 20-foot circular force field was in place. A uniformed policeman shoved his way through the crowd and slammed into the force field, his face flushed with anger as he drew his service automatic and ordered Perrin and Jeff to surrender. Moments later, a plainclothes officer made his way to the cop, showed him a badge, and ordered the man to put away his gun. Perrin motioned for the TV cameraman to lower the crane. She watched him communicate with someone over his headset. Then she tugged Jeff's arm and pointed up at the slowly descending crane bucket. Jeff lowered the crystal, its blue light throbbing like a heartbeat. When the bucket reached ground level, Jeff said, "Could we come up with you?" The crane operator was a paunchy, middle-aged man whose round face wore a cautious grin. "Be my guest," he said, "but there's only room in here for one of you." He offered Jeff a hand. "Be right back," Jeff said to Perrin, kissing her quickly. A moment later, the bucket ascended into the air, and Perrin felt a firm grasp on her arm. Jeff now held the crystal skyward, the blue beam hissing and crackling, lightning like blasts into the dark clouds that hung over the scene like a shroud. With his left hand, he threw the flyers into the wind. They floated out over the milling thousands to be snatched from the air by the curious, the activists, the media, and lawmen alike. The cameraman tapped Jeff on the shoulder. "We're live. The camera on the truck over there is covering us. Do you want to say anything?" The man was taking off his headset as he spoke. "Yes, I do," Jeff said. As he spoke, he glanced and saw a man in a topcoat grasping Perrin's arm and pulling her away. "Leave her alone," Jeff screamed. When the man didn't release her, Jeff raised the crystal rod and unleashed his anger through the crystal. A pulsating burst of blue light snapped and sizzled off the tip of the crystal. The target shot backwards into the crowd as if kicked by a horse, then doubled forward, screaming in agony, and pitched face first to the ground. Perrin fell the other direction, then leaped to her feet and bolted into the crowd whose attention was focused on Jeff. As she pushed deeper into the layers of humanity, she felt safer and turned to see policemen running into the area. "Get the girl," somebody yelled. The police were clearing the field beneath the crane bucket. Perrin worked even deeper into the crowd and turned just in time to see the bucket topple out of the sky, hitting the ground with an earth-shaking thump. "Jeff!" she screamed, straining to see what was happening 20 feet in front of her. Even on her tiptoes, she couldn't see a thing. The crowd panicked and began milling around mindlessly, some shoving forward, others trying to get out of the way. She struggled to breathe in the crush of people. Screaming sirens sliced through the mass hysteria like banshees warning of horrors to come. The helicopter descended to 50 feet above the crowd, and the thumping roar battered at her ears like pounding fists. Dust and grit assaulted her eyes, forcing her to squeeze them shut and let herself be tossed along by the aimless direction of the crowd. "Senator, turn on Channel 7 right now," said a familiar voice on the phone. Without acknowledging the caller, Charles Ames pushed the TV remote button and channel selector on his desk, then put down the phone. Across the room, a large screen television set flickered to life. The picture showed thousands of people on the lawn of the Federal Building. A young man was throwing flyers from a crane bucket with one hand while shooting lightning into the air with his other. When Jeff Lafayette's girlfriend was apprehended by LAPD Detective Ralph Banner, the young man turned the laser gun on the policeman. Ames watched the detective fly into the crowd and pitch forward on his face. The moment Lafayette acted violently, Police Captain Daniel Grover ordered the crane operator to drop the basket. The next shaky pictures from the handheld camera were of Lafayette, handcuffed, being thrown into a police car. Lafayette's girlfriend, Perrin McKinley, is being sought for questioning at this time. Anyone knowing her whereabouts is requested to call the Los Angeles Police Department. The camera cut to a still close-up of Perrin at the scene. This effort to stop Senator Charles Ames' solar laser generation project began last night when Lafayette destroyed the capstone of the Beverly Hills. Ames lowered the TV volume and picked up the receiver. Find out who the hell Lafayette is and who's behind him. This is the kind of story that will get international coverage. Ames slammed the receiver back in its cradle and twisted his chair around to take in the ocean view from the window of his Pacific Palisades home. The dark sea was empty, its colors blending with the storm-cloaked sky to conceal the horizon. The senator sat quietly, seemingly calm, but his lips twisted in a snarl and his nostrils flared as he unconsciously twisted and bent the gold pen in his hand. Marcus McKinley had already seen the newscast when Perrin reached her father on the phone. Dad, please don't ask me any questions now. Just listen. I don't dare go back to our apartment, and I'm sure the police will be at your house soon. I need a good lawyer, and fast. You've known Jerry McFarland all your life, Perrin. He's one of the best. Being Saturday, I hope I can find him. Where are you now? In a phone booth. I'm driving a rented car, so I don't think the police are onto it. I'll drive around and then call you in a half hour. Call me at Stacy's house. I'd better not be here when the police arrive. It took 2 hours to find Jerry McFarland and set up a meeting at his Warner Center office. Perrin saw her father waiting by the elevators in the underground parking facility as she pulled to a stop in the nearly empty garage. She embraced him with a desperate hug that was interrupted by the opening elevator doors. They stepped in, and Marcus McKinley pushed 16. His ebony hair had grayed becomingly at the temples, and his blue eyes matched his daughter's. Perrin thought the set of his chin suggested the stubbornness she'd inherited from him. He was an attractive 58-year-old stock analyst with a tennis court tan and a warm smile for his only daughter. In a dither? He asked, squeezing her hand. Yeah, she said as they stepped off the elevator. Jerry McFarland was 60 with a thin face and a lean, wiry body and a tough demeanor. He'd cut short a golf game to meet with the McKinleys. It took Perrin nearly an hour to tell the whole story. They let Channel 7 play at low volume in the background, and when the station replayed the story as a news break, they turned up the volume and watched closely. Past lives? Mind-powered laser beams? Conspiracy? Good Lord, Jerry said, tilting back in his desk chair. LAPD is the least of our problems. The government, the CIA, FBI, NSA, they're all going to want to stick pins in your boyfriend to find out what makes him tick. Then there's Senator Ames. He's powerful, he's mean, and he'll want the matter handled to serve his own interests. What about Perrin's involvement? Marcus asked. She didn't do anything but walk to the federal building with Jeff, but that may not stop the feds from putting her through the ringer. I was playing golf with a federal judge. I think I'll call him. They won't charge Jeff until a lot of important people decide how they want to handle the situation. That will be Sunday afternoon. The judge won't set bail until Monday morning, Jerry said as Marcus pulled his Lincoln town car into a metered parking place a half block from the West Los Angeles police station. Perrin sat in the front seat between the two men. They'll hit Jeff with vandalism for destroying the capstone, but an assault charge won't stick because there are too many extenuating circumstances. When he zapped the detective, he was protecting you, Perrin. Thank you for agreeing to represent Jeff, too. Perrin said. Hell, you'll probably get more publicity out of this case than anything you've ever handled, Marcus said and laughed. Just what I need, Jerry muttered. He patted Perrin's shoulder as she got out of the car. They've guaranteed there will be no charges filed based upon your involvement as you've related it to me, he said. I'll be right there with you during the questioning. As they approached the entrance, media personnel armed with cameras and notebooks stepped out of cars. The back doors of a Channel 11 TV remote van opened and a man with a TV camera leaned into view. Miss McKinley, please take a moment and tell us your side of the story, shouted a black man waving a microphone. Flashes exploded in Perrin's eyes, momentarily blinding her. Can you zap people with crystals too? Somebody said. Hey, come on, take a couple of minutes to talk to us. The whole world wants to know about this. Perrin looked at her father and then at Jerry McFarland, who was shaking his head. They pushed their way past the microphones, floodlights, and grasping people, up the stairs and into the front doors of the police department. This way, please, said a black-suited man with narrow eyes and sharp, chiseled features. He pointed and led the way. Perrin, her father, and her lawyer followed a couple of paces behind down a sterile hallway. Their footsteps echoed off the barren walls, and Perrin reflected on similar scenes in old movies. Two more plainclothesmen followed behind. They all entered a large office occupied by three more men. Sit down. Which one of you is a lawyer? I am, Jerry said. The man in the black suit opened his wallet and handed it to Jerry. The Attorney General of the United States considers this to be a matter of the highest national security. The President is involved. Normal process of law is temporarily suspended. Jeff Lafayette and Para McKinley will leave immediately for Washington, D.C. Just a minute. Nobody, including the President, is above the law, Jerry said, standing up to face the man in black. Come along, miss, said another man, taking Perrin's arm. Hold on, Marcus said as he stepped forward to protect his daughter. Letting go of Perrin's arm, the men threw a vicious kidney punch into Marcus's side, sending him sprawling to the ground. Shouldn't have tried to hit an officer of the law, he snarled. With Jerry ineffectually demanding something and Marcus withering on the floor in agony, the two men dragged Perrin, struggling and screaming, out the door, down a long hallway, and into a car waiting by the back door of the police station. If the public has any doubts about the solar laser generator, activists will get involved and will never get approval, Senator Charles Ames said. The man he was speaking to sat in the shadows, looking out the window of the Learjet 31 as it streaked through the night sky towards Washington, D.C. The activists have been on our side up until now, Ames. The senator raised his finger to the cabin steward and pointed to his empty drink glass. Moments later, he was served a fresh Cuddies on the rocks. I can't help it if some asshole comes out of the woodwork to denounce the project with carnival tricks, the senator said. His voice sounded tired. It wasn't the carnival trick that blew the capstone or flattened the cop. All they found in Lafayette was a simple quartz crystal, said the man in the shadows. Who the hell could have set it up? Ames asked, twisting his glass as he observed the pinpoint lights of Omaha, Nebraska, 47,000 feet below. Somebody who has something against you, Ames. That probably reduces the suspects to only a few thousand. The senator didn't reply. The man in the shadows continued. We're talking about billions of dollars. Billions, with a capital B. If this goes haywire, we disappear and you'll be left to explain. Christ's sake, they'd tar and feather me, Ames said. For starters, the man in the shadows chuckled. I want Lafayette dead, Ames said. That's easy, was the reply. The big car with black rear seclusion windows and a privacy window between the driver and passengers pulled to a stop. Perrin, sitting between two men in the black seat, tensed as the man on her right opened the door and stepped out. Damp February air that smelled of kelp and fuel oil filled the car. A woman climbed into the car, grasped Perrin's right arm, and snapped on a handcuff. A moment later, the other cuff was secured to the woman's left wrist. The privacy window lowered. "Okay, everybody out," said the black-suited man in the front seat. Beside the car was an Astra 1125 private jet. The woman tugged Perrin's arm and nodded at the stairs leading up into the plane. Perrin scanned the surroundings and decided they were at an airport near the ocean, but it sure didn't look like LAX. She followed the woman up the stairs. Two passengers were already in the plane, one of them Jeff, handcuffed to the man beside him. "Oh, Jeff, thank goodness," Perrin said, jerking forward, trying to reach him. The woman she was cuffed to restrained her. "Let them sit facing each other by the window," said the man in black. He nodded to one of his men who reached into a briefcase and snapped on a recording device. As they moved into the seating area, Perrin leaned down and kissed Jeff before they could stop her. "What did they do to you?" she asked, nodding at a bruise swelling his eye and mottling the side of his face. "When they dropped the bucket, I landed on my face and dropped the crystal. Then a cop got in his licks with a nightstick. Are you okay?" "Yes. My dad and our lawyer, Jerry McFarland, are involved. He'll represent you. Jerry contacted a federal judge before we even stepped into the West LA police station. But these clowns just moved in and took over." Perrin nodded at the sour-looking group surrounding them. Don't sweat these guys," Jeff said, laughing. "I can make them disappear just by twitching my nose." "Let's not push it, Jeff," Perrin said. She looked at their jailers. Two men, formally dressed, devoid of humor, and one middle-aged woman who looked like she just swallowed a toad. "The band and I always wanted a tour by private jet," Jeff said as the plane taxied down the runway and shot into the night sky at 4,500 feet per minute and leveled out at 40,000 feet. "The guy you zapped, the one who grabbed me, is going to be fine. They said it was just as if he'd been hit by an electrical stun gun," Perrin said. "I could have told you that," Jeff replied. "They had your Prescott doctor on television by the time we were leaving McFarland's office. He was showing your x-rays and chattering like a true believer." "I'll bet they even showed footage of my crumpled car in the creek bed." Jeff smiled. Perrin nodded. "Perrin," Jeff said, "remember when I was meditating this morning? I don't know much about meditation, but Odin does, and I'm learning fast. Anyway, I went back mentally to Atlantis, but it wasn't really back in time because time isn't what we think it is." Perrin scowled at her lover, dipping her head towards their captors. Don't worry about these robots. They only understand orders from the viewer." The man cuffed to Jeff threw his elbow into Jeff's ribs and snarled, "Listen, you long-haired asshole." "Cut her," the man in black snapped. "Stuff it." Jeff puffed his cheeks and blew out slowly. "Honey, make a note. We turned Cutter into a blue cockroach." He shook his head and said, "Where was I? Oh, yeah. I learned some real interesting stuff about time this morning. Several American physicists support the theory that time doesn't relate to reality. In research work with elements of energy, these scientists have proven that a particle of energy can leave here and get there before it left. If this relates to humans, it could mean we may have died before we were born." Perrin flashed Jeff a quizzical look. Jeff continued, "A lot of metaphysicians believe that all events that have ever been, are now, or ever will be, are eternally in existence. We as individuals simply move along these events. Maybe this explains precognitive dreams and psychic glimpses of the future. An analogy might be to imagine your experiences as beads strung on a thread that represents time. You're a small mark on the thread that strings the beads together, and you're being pulled through the beads one at a time. The mark, which is you, is limited to experiencing each bead one at a time in sequence. Yet, once in a while, we get a glimpse of a bead to come, and you experience a prophetic flash. If this is so, then the major events in your life are predetermined, but your reactions to the events are a matter of free will. "You're getting too complicated for me, Jeff," Perrin said. "If everything is happening at once, would one incarnation be affecting your other incarnations?" "Yes. Odin showed me an example that explains it. Think of all your lifetimes as a multi-level chessboard. Each level of the board represents a lifetime. You have one chessman on each level. Now think of the levels of glass and then look down upon them from above. It appears to be one chessboard. You see many individual figures, but they're all you. The kings, queens, knights, the pawns. Each is you in a different incarnation. You in past lives, you in your present life, and you in future lives. Any move on any level has an effect upon the other levels, just as moving one chessman in a chess game has an effect upon the total game." Jeff took a deep breath and glanced at his captors. They were staring at him as if he were out of his mind. "All time is transpiring right now," he continued. "Life is just a big multi-level chess game. Did you fellas get that on tape?" "All time is an ever-present now?" Perrin said, appearing to mull over the concept. She was looking out the window while actually observing the reflections of Cutter and the black-suited man sitting across the aisle. When they were both looking away, Perrin turned to Jeff and raised her left hand to remove the backing of her crystal earring. She lowered her hand and rolled the small piece of silver between her thumb and index finger. Jeff smiled and winked. "I have to go to the bathroom," Jeff said to Cutter. As he stood up, he leaned over to kiss Perrin, stroked her face, and palmed the 2-inch quartz crystal. "I'm going to tell you everything I know and everything that has happened," Jerry McFarland said into the bank of microphones that covered the podium. Marcus and Mary McKinley stood beside him on the stage of the LA Press Club. It was 9 p.m. and the room was jammed with reporters. On a riser along the back wall, 8 television cameras focused on the speaker. "Above all, ours is a nation of laws," Jerry McFarland shouted, stabbing the air with his index finger. "In our time, we have impeached presidents who thought themselves above the law. Tonight, once again, representatives of our government have made a mockery of our judicial system." McFarland used his most dramatic courtroom techniques to relate Jeff and Perrin's story. He detailed the events of the last 24 hours. He dramatized the experiences at the West LA Police Department and ended saying, "At this very minute, Perrin McKinley and Jeff Lafayette have been robbed of their right to due process of the law by the country's top cop, the Attorney General of the United States of America. I'm asking for the free press of this country to make him account for his Gestapo tactics." Jerry turned to Marcus and Mary and whispered, "They'll circle Washington like frenzied sharks scenting blood." "How long until we get to Washington?" Jeff asked the nameless black-suited man. 90 minutes. Jeff looked at Perrin. "I'm going to try to take a nap." She nodded and smiled. The lady agent handcuffed to Perrin scowled but didn't say anything. Jeff closed his eyes, slipped his right hand into the pocket of his jeans, and clasped the crystal earring. He mentally sent relaxing suggestions to his feet, lower legs, upper legs, and on up through his body until all physical sensation faded away. His mind remained alert as he began to silently count down, visualizing himself falling through space, tumbling and twisting, then dropping like a felled bird out of a black sky. Number 7, deeper, 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 Down, down, down. Number 6. Deeper, deeper, deeper. He counted down from 7 to 1 5 times before the black sky began to fade into midnight blue, then navy blue, and finally sky blue as he descended through billowing clouds toward a gleaming white city. He landed on his feet in a garden of fruit trees, ferns, and rose bushes. A low wall enclosed the manicured courtyard. A fountain bubbled into the air, cascading water into a pool. Odin walked through an arch to welcome Jeff with a hearty embrace. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon," Odin said. He was in his 50s, with shoulder-length black hair and copper-colored skin. "I don't have much time," Jeff said. "You talked before of astral projection." "You're in your astral body now," Odin said. "Can you help me project to someone else?" "Of course. Capture their essence in your mind. Visualize how the person looks, how they move, hear them speak. Say their name over and over silently in your mind." Jeff closed his eyes and imagined Senator Charles Ames. Images of Kezar and Ames overlapped and melded into each other until Jeff exerted his will to focus only upon the image of the senator. Odin's voice was far away, saying, "Now remain focused upon the mental image while you let your astral body slip away." For a moment, Jeff thought he'd awakened on the plane, but it was a different plane, with more luxurious appointments. 3 men were in the passenger section, a steward who sat in the rear, and 2 men in the midsection. One was Ames. The other was sitting in the shadows. "They can't see me. They really can't see me," Jeff thought as he moved to within a few feet of the men. Ames' face was flushed, and he looked angry when he spoke, saying, "The Yataka 8 wouldn't walk away clean if I told them what I know about the Chancellor Project and your association with a Dutch industrialist and an East German munitions manufacturer." "You are outliving your usefulness, Senator Ames." The man in the shadows leaned into the light, and Jeff recognized him immediately as Dr. Stanford Brandeis, billionaire philanthropist and chairman of the Japanese-American Industrial Council. "Let's just handle the situation," Ames said as he tossed down the rest of his drink. "For 5 years, the Japanese have been buying up the world's quartz crystal. Everything's in place, so take care of this Lafayette." At the mention of his name, Jeff felt shock, followed by tugging at his arm. He resisted, then winced in pain as the handcuff cut into his wrist. He opened his eyes to see Perrin looking at him with loving concern. Cutter was twisting in his seat, and a phone was ringing. The man in black answered the phone. He listened intently while looking directly into Jeff's eyes, then punched off the receiver without saying goodbye. He hit the intercom button. "Captain, we have a change of plans. Find a small, deserted airfield and set us down as soon as possible." There was a pause. "I don't care what you think. That's an order. And maintain radio silence." "Why?" Jeff said loudly. "You don't ask questions, Crystal Boy. You just go where I take you, and it looks like it's going to be Central Ohio." He looked out the plane window, adjusting his shoulder holster while staring into the blackness. Jeff glanced at Perrin. She was worried, and he knew it. The plane dipped to the left and began to lose altitude. "We aren't supposed to make it to Washington. Is that it?" Jeff shouted. Cutter smiled sadistically at Jeff. The man in black didn't reply. The plane leveled out, and the only sound in the cabin was the deep-throated roar of the jet engines. Minutes later, the plane circled and dropped lower. From his window, Jeff could see the moonlighted, snow-capped ground 1,000 feet below. Occasional farm lights were the only signs of civilization. Perrin laid her hand on Jeff's knee for a moment until the woman jerked her back. "What do you think I'm going to do with both of us handcuffed like animals?" Perrin snapped at the woman. "Don't touch him again," the woman snarled in reply. The phone buzzed. The man in black picked it up. "It'll do fine," he said. "When we land, you're both to remain in the cockpit until I tell you differently. Understand?" There was a pause. Jeff imagined the captain arguing. "Yes, it's an order." The landing was smooth, but the Astra 1125 began to slide sideways. Jeff and Perrin held their breath as the pilot made his corrections and the plane straightened out and eased to a stop. "Outside," said the nameless man, throwing open the hatch door. Cutter jerked Jeff to his feet and into the aisle. The man in black was the first one down the stairway into the sub-zero white night. Jeff, still wearing his herringbone sport coat, shivered as he stepped into the wind. Halfway down the runway was a small tower on top of a cafe. Beyond it, 2 hangars. There were no lights. Jeff and Perrin were directed towards the tail of the plane. "Uncuff them," said the man in black, drawing a large frame automatic from under his arm. Cutter and the woman quickly followed orders, then joined their boss facing Jeff and Perrin. "Oh, God, they're going to kill us!" Perrin screamed and grabbed Jeff's arm. "Why?" Jeff asked, drawing the already pulsating crystal from his pocket. The man in black was raising his handgun as Jeff raised the crystal and sent a burst of blue light sizzling out of the tip of the crystal. The light hit the man in black in the chest, spinning him off his feet and into the snow. Cutter was drawing his weapon when the second burst of light hit him like a giant fist. He staggered for a moment like a drunk before pitching face first into the runway. The man in black had pulled himself up on one elbow and was searching for his dropped handgun. The woman started to run for the plane. "Stop her!" Jeff screamed as Perrin jumped forward, darting toward the stairway. The woman was on the 5th step when Perrin dove for her foot, grabbed it, and yanked hard, dropping the woman face first onto the stairs. Holding onto the foot, Perrin struggled to her feet and dragged the woman backwards, her face bouncing down the steel stairs and into the snow. The woman was stunned and bleeding, and Perrin was trying to decide what to do next when she felt Jeff's hand on her arm. "Back into the plane, now!" He pushed her up the stairway in front of him. Once inside, he threw the hatch closed and moved quickly to the cockpit door, opening it with a jerk. "Gentlemen, it's time to leave," he said, brandishing the man in black's handgun. "You don't need that," the captain replied. "We saw what happened in the mirror." He gestured with his hand. "They would probably have killed us after killing you." The jets roared to life. The plane taxied a little further down the snow-packed runway before turning. Then, without hesitation, it shot forward, screaming past the 3 stunned figures in the snow and catapulted into the night sky. "Somebody high on the power scale wants you dead," the co-pilot said to Jeff, still hunched in the doorway. "We'll leave you out of it," Jeff replied. "Just tell them we forced you to fly us out of there." "They'll break into that Hick Airport building and call Washington," the captain said. "Other planes will be on our tail within 20 minutes. "Where can you put us down?" Jeff asked. Clarksburg, West Virginia, in 15 minutes. "How far is it from Washington?" Jeff asked. "About 200 miles. "Do it," Jeff said, looking over his shoulder at Perrin. Her face was colorless, and she was trembling.